Hello, thank you for joining us today. I'm Dave Fortino, SVP of Audience, Marketing, and Product over at Netline. I'd like to welcome you to our session. Today, the session specifically titled Pivot for Pipeline, How TripActions Evolved Their ABM Strategy During COVID-19. We're going to be featuring Colm Shalvey, Head of ABM at TripActions. Before we dive into today's content, I am going to need to do a little bit of housekeeping. As you know, today's event is hosted by the ABM Leadership Alliance. I'm supposed to say I would say scripted response here, but I really want to give people some color into what ABM Leadership Alliance means to me. And so I think from my perspective, it's been easy for me to recognize that they really represent the greatest consolidation of high IQ ABM minds that I've been afforded to engage with. And so I think, adhering to the normal script probably doesn't even do the alliance justice. So I'll leave that there. Today, many of those minds have joined together on this virtual stage. So a few final notes before we get going. If you happen to hear any compelling or insightful bits of knowledge that Colm or I are dropping, please use the hashtag EvolvingABM. That's supported on Twitter and LinkedIn, obviously. Supporting materials from today's presentation have been uploaded to the resource section of the console as well. You can grab them at any time. All of today's sessions are also being recorded. They'll be available for on-demand later. And you will receive a copy via email too, so don't go searching for it. You'll get it, don't worry. We've also left a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. If there are an overflow of questions, we'll actually circle back after the event and follow up with you individually. Before beginning, I just want to again extend a very warm and personal thank you to Colm and TripActions for sharing their story today. We really appreciate you being here. And I think that's it. We can get started now. And so what I'll briefly do is just walk you through the agenda for today. The agenda is most specifically talking about TripActions' journey as it relates to not only COVID, but the tactical executions that they've leveraged in this environment to not only drive deeper engagement per accounts and drive deeper engagement within various levels within key accounts, but also the content strategies associated to that. And we'll kind of wrap up the session a bit as to how a lot of those underlying ideas, executions, and the data supporting them are really available through a number of tools that Netline makes available, whether it's our content consumption report or perhaps Audience Explorer. We'll leave those at the end as some nuggets that you can have as actionable takeaways to ideally arm your campaigns for future success. And so, Colm, I'm going to turn this over to you, and we can go from there.
So I won't be offended by the fact that you mentioned the high IQ IBM leaders in the ABM Alliance that I'm not a member of, but I appreciate that anyways. So thank you for the introduction. So what I wanted to provide here was a quick overview of the ABM journey that TripActions has been on since I've joined. And I think there's a bunch of factors that have kind of driven this, both minor and major, that I want to address here. I think the elephant in the room was obviously COVID, which is why we're doing this over a webinar, which is why we're not doing a physical event, and which why my role in a company that deals with business travel is particularly effective. So so I joined in February of 2019. We had roughly 400 employees at that time. About 6 months after I joined, less, we had a new funding round, right? So we went from a $1 billion company to a $4 billion company in the space of 6 months. We then had new sales leadership come in November of that end of year. And then we had COVID-19, which halts all travel in March of 2020. And the reason I kind of lay these out is because each of these factors actually led to the story I'm going to tell you. So first of all, I was hired for ABM. That's not always a title that we see. I was hired because the understanding was that TripActions needed to get more tactical around how we address target accounts, right? The new funding round was driven particularly by our growth in the mid-market enterprise. That was seen as an area of growth that we needed to focus on. The new sales leadership was enterprise heavy, right? Our new CRO came from MongoDB, where he had built and scaled a machine. And then COVID-19 is how we're addressing the current environment and trying to deal with that now and then also build ourselves for the future. So when I first started, the launch of the initial ABM strategy was driven particularly by sales, right? So they gave us a list of targets that they identified. It's important to note this was not based on any data or data intelligence that we had. We built a basic formula. One of the challenges with the travel market is travel is not solely dependent on employee size or revenue, right? So when I come from my previous company of dealing with B2B tech, an enterprise data company was very easy to identify using firmographic information. Travel, not so much. So that's where we had to rely on qualitative insights from sales. And when it came to determining the tier of account, and again, this determined the expenditure, the number of channels, the number of resources that we devoted to each of these levels. That's where we relied on sales managers, right? So each manager would pick 2 to 3 target accounts from their team. The managers would select another group above that. The RVPs would select the tier A. So again, you can kind of see what the rough outline here was. And I have been teased, rightfully so, about this pyramid because this pyramid has taken on many permutations over the course of 9 to 12 months as we've adjusted and changed. So I'm not going to bore you with all of the iterations of this pyramid. I can tell you that there are multiple. They are all gorgeous, but the information has changed drastically over the time as we've adjusted.
So Colin, quick question there. For the account selection process, how involved was marketing throughout that? Were you really just the recipient of the final outputs, or were you kind of woven in throughout the stages as they were coming to their own conclusions?
It was actually really dependent on team. So first of all, I think the first honest answer is not as involved as we wanted to be or should have been. Certain teams had a very direct idea of these are the accounts we care about. This is who we want to talk to.
Sure.
Others were much more reliant on us. So one of the reasons I brought up that, when I joined, there was 400 people. By the time June rolled around, there was closer to 800, 900, right? So we were going through explosive growth. So we had tons of new sales reps, tons of new sales teams, regions, you name it. And they became a lot more reliant on us for input. So that's where we actually built a formula around industry, growth levels, number of offices, number of sales hires in the last 6 months, these kind of various metrics that we used to build a proprietary scoring system that was 51% accurate when I looked at the numbers, so you may as well flip the coin. But it gave us some insight into here's what we think is better than others.
Sure.
So that's the answer to how we were involved on the account selection.
Great, thanks.
Cool. So obviously the evolution, right? And this is where we talk about upmarket. And this is a macro change in TripActions, right? So when we look at the product and the company of TripActions, our entire evolution has been based around supporting companies at scale, right? So travel by definition is a one-to-one business that requires immense support and help if you're going to do it correctly. We have done better than anyone else in the market around providing that support. So as we saw that natural fit and we saw the economies of scale, frankly, that's where mid-market and enterprise became such a cleaner fit for us. That unfortunately and fortunately required a complete sea change in sales strategy, marketing strategy. We went from 1 call closes and 2-week sales cycles to 6 to 9 month RFP processes overnight, right? So also the number of people we needed to talk to, which I'll get into more detail, changed dramatically, right? And this is where we really need to learn new skills as an entire organization, right? So marketing being part of that, but ABM was a central tenet of this because the expectation is ABM is always going to be better suited for a longer term, larger enterprise sale. So this is where the focus really became on me, on my part of the team, on how we're going to deliver on that. So the other part that kind of came up at the same time is we released a new product called TripActions Liquid, which is a payment solution. So think, things like Brex and other people in the market. But what we realized was when people talk about travel, right? The vast majority of expenses happen on travel, with travel, sorry. So clearly there was a natural fit there from a product standpoint, but there's a massive change in the complexity of sale, the length of sale, the parts of the organization we need to deal with. These things, again, rapidly expanded as we kind of changed and evolved into a whole new place in the market. And this is something that, by the way, we're still learning and figuring out. The TripActions Liquid product is now really coming out as a public product. We've been running it for a while with some key customers. But this is an area where, again, we are learning how to market this and how to do that at scale. Again, coming from a situation where only 12 months ago, we were focused on commercial clients doing a very straightforward product offering to one person that typically closed within a month, right? So now, 12 months later, we are looking at 6 to 9 months, multiple areas of the organization, multiple stakeholders, and a more significant investment, right? Not just from a money standpoint, but really from a organizational tech debt, right? I mean, if you have Concur or a product like that, the idea of replacing that is daunting, to say the least, right? And this was a challenge that I had faced previously at NetSuite, right? So if you're talking about an ERP replacement, it's not enough to be the better, right? You have to be fundamentally better. You have to be able to show value in a very quick timescale because you have to defend a massive change for an organization. Not just the tools and all the things that go into that, but all of the downwind effects. So that's another area where, again, product marketing, product team, the strategy team, the travel supplier team, all of us have to come together and understand how we are communicating this product and how we're doing that in a way that makes sense. And it also is a way that is profitable for us, right? So that's, again, the other challenge that's been layered on top of this. The third thing, I didn't devote a slide to it here, was really the COVID-19 coronavirus, however you want to term it, is an unprecedented impact on all of our companies. But within travel, it's just it's massive, right? So we literally went from millions of dollars of revenue per and all of a sudden it was like a light switch got shut off, right? All travel stopped. There's also the existential worry for a lot of our potential customers, where they're not looking for a new product because they are worried about making payroll, right? So what we've found is this has done a lot of positive and negative things for us. Negative, clear, travel is gone. Revenue associated with travel is gone. Our commercial business is harder, right? Because again, those companies are dealing with existential threats. What we've seen though is we've actually had a lot of success in the mid-market and enterprise side. So it's actually accelerated this transition that we had already been in. Part of the reason for that is those companies are obviously more stable in terms of their survivability. They're also more interested in change management in a time like this when they don't have 1,000 people on the road today. Right. So the opportunity to implement a whole new product that deals with those people is actually a little bit easier to do. Right. We've closed our biggest customers in the last 2 months, right, of all time.
That's really interesting. It's I would imagine that's comforting for some folks to hear, because your market specifically, if you were on the outside looking in, I think the first part of your description here is everybody would picture that, right? But
I get a lot, I'm sorry for you texts. I totally get it. Yeah.
Absolutely. But hearing that, that's really compelling, and it's kudos to you guys for sorting that out and finding a way through.
Yeah, and it continues, right? I mean, the biggest challenge with the COVID-19 situation, and again, I'm speaking in broad terms, I think, because it affects all of us, is there isn't a clear delineation of when it's over, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So when we talk about plans and strategies, and what I consider the most challenging time for us right now is this time, right? So it was almost simple when it was binary. So everything shut down in March and April. Every state was shut down. There was zero movement. The rules were enforced. Now we're in this kind of shaded gray, right? So international markets are varying and different. States are different. I mean, I live in California. Counties have different rules. So now it becomes even more complex, right? So things like, we had a thriving direct mail channel from a marketing perspective, which ended when, offices shut down. But now some offices are relevant, some are not. And it's harder now because I can't just make a blanket statement like, well, direct mail doesn't work, because it could work in Alabama and does not work in California, right? And this is an area that we've, kind of dealt with. The other part that I've seen, around COVID-19 is everyone pivoted the same way at the same time, right? So the amount of webinars I've been invited to has been multiplied by 100. The amount of digital gift cards I received for these trying times multiplied by 100. And we are doing the exact same thing, by the way. But it becomes challenging. Like, how do you stick out from the noise, right? And we found that content and content data was really a kind of differentiator there for us, because there was a massive need to know, right? So we launched office hours as an example around COVID-19 and duty of care and these kind of things of how to take care of your travelers, and be responsible. And just the amount of appetite for information, right, was staggering. And that's when we really ramped up our content creation to meet that need, right? So our, as multiple channels have gone down, so for example, paid search has dropped, but online collateral, so those people who come to our website and downloaded a piece of content, that's grown 200%, right? Content syndication has remained strong, and I'll show you some of those numbers in detail. But it's remained a strong and steady channel. Webinars have grown 150%, right? So there's areas where we've seen the trends. The trick is going to be how to continue the improvements we've made while integrating these other channels as they come back. I think that's a topic for another webinar when I have the answer, which I don't yet.
Absolutely. And there's the thought process as well, is that as things come back, there's the potential that they then recede again, and
Absolutely.
So it's not just gray. It's this multitude of 50 shades of gray, if you will, whereby you don't know where you're at on any given day, which is very challenging for us all.
And it's interesting to really see the travel trends that become so specific to industry, right? So industries like architecture and building construction. I mean, I can tell you those companies are traveling today, right? I mean, they have been, dying to travel. So as soon as there was any opening on that, they have jumped at it. When you talk about tech and software, which is our number one segment, because we're a Palo Alto-based company, the opposite, right? They
Sure.
are very reticent to travel. They are just starting to open up offices. We haven't opened up our own office yet. So it is interesting to see those kind of changes, not only by region, but also by specific industry and region.
Yeah.
Cool. So kind of, and I alluded to this before. So this is kind of the change in broad strategy when I talk about content syndication. So this strategy is across all our channels. It's easiest and most applicable for content syndication type programs because I can be much more specific and definitive around who I want to target, right? So we do some targeted display, we do some paid social, we do all those channels everyone else does. But we have, and I brought this in, because I have a history in content syndication, but we've had a backbone of content syndication as part of our marketing arm since mid last year. And this is coming from a company that had zero before, right? Because it just wasn't seen as a quick selling, again, transactional business the way we had come from. That being said, we were still going after commercial accounts. So the focus on the left here, you'll see, I just wanted to get the VP of finance or the person who managed travel in as many accounts as possible. Right. So one of the challenges we have from a targeting perspective, and this is where content becomes imperative, is, and a lot of you can probably speak to this in your own organization, there's very few companies that have a person who is called the travel manager or the head of travel, right? It usually lives in finance at some level. It can sometimes live in HR. It can sometimes be a complete admin function. I can't tell you the amount of office managers who are the travel heads of their organization. And these aren't small companies. My old company was a $1 billion startup, 450 employees, but all travel was managed by the office manager, right? The same person who was in charge of snacks dealt with travel, right? Other places we have multiple levels of travel management, like for instance, Slack. So again, it's not easy and definitive, but that's where content and content targeting became so imperative for us. So we knew that finance was our best best persona, and we had the numbers to support that. But we needed to make sure that we were structuring and titling our content in a way that attracted the right people in finance. When you talk about travel from an expense perspective, a lot of people have a stake in it. That doesn't necessarily mean they have management stake in it or have the ability to influence it in the way we want it. So we were very, very specific and I would say very narrow in how we titled and targeted our content when we were looking at this strategy, right? It was one prospect, again, the one person that we felt was the right person, and we were trying to go as wide as possible. As many accounts as I could get, that's what I wanted. Flip to our current situation, we still have a commercial business. We still are doing well there, so we're still supporting that. But we have obviously gone much, much heavier into mid-market and enterprise. And here's where that narrow content focus is actually flipped, right? We want to get into multiple levels of these organizations. So the VP of Finance, the CFO, the accounts payable manager, we go after the HR businesses, we go after the procurement function, which is not an easy function we found to penetrate, but we've had some success, especially with Netline. And these are the areas where the content now becomes more problem focused and becomes a little bit broader, right? This is also as we experiment and figure out how to best market an expense platform on top of that, right? And that's where we've had some evolution. And Dave, remind me again, we were just chatting about this. So one of the things that has been actually really helpful from a content intelligence perspective to kind of as we make these changes. I will be the first to admit what I used to do in content syndication. I would run 4 assets and I would drop the lowest volume one every quarter. And I call that optimization. But as you actually dig into the data, right? So a great example is I have 3 assets, and typically 75% of the downloads is from one asset. But I'll have an asset that has 100 downloads and an asset that has 30 downloads. But what I started to do was I would dig into the Netline portal, which gave me really in-depth information. And what I'd find is that asset with 30 downloads, 25 of them were CFOs, right? Whereas the 100 downloads, still important, but they were managers and VPs and directors. And that allowed me to kind of see the value of each content type and piece, not just from a volume perspective, right? Which can be just misleading, right? Just, I think we've all published a checklist at one time or another that, blew up and was incredibly popular, but really didn't drive any end business. And that's where, the Netline data has actually helped us make those choices.
Yeah, that's huge. I think far too often many marketers are still doing what you used to do, which is, they're taking a group of content, regardless of format, optimizing based upon engagement volume only. But it's really the details as to how you're looking at content consumption engagement and the supporting metrics around who is consuming what pieces of content. And then still, you might find some assets do need to be dropped because they're attracting the wrong people. And or perhaps your top of funnel content's attracting people who seemingly are more apt to be down funnel. And so you probably should get some content that's more appropriate for their stage. But yeah, without going deep into there and just simply looking at counts, you can't really truly optimize any content-centric effort, regardless of your deployment strategies.
And I will be honest, I've had difficulty assigning stages to types of content. That has been an area that's been difficult. What I had more success on is, because I tried to make it perfect, right? And the issue I faced was you spend all this time on a quarterly basis to consume and produce this report that tells what the right content is, and then all the new content comes out, right? So all this data that you have is in many ways out of date already. But what I found was being able to be really confident around the persona fit and the level fit made it much easier, because then it was like, hey, this is a broad topic that is applicable to CFOs. This is a broad topic that is applicable to VPs of finance. And, there's ways that we can experiment within the funnel to kind of see what's better suited, for what stage. And we've used a variety of channels to test that. So I've done it backwards and forwards, right? So I've used the Netline data to inform what I do on display, and I've used what I've found on display to inform what I've done in Netline.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
And I think the notion of having a linear buyer's journey today is completely flawed. Many people have covered that. But as it relates to assigning stages of the journey to content, I personally have vetted vendors by going deep into their bottom of funnel content first, and not knowing anything about features, but maybe cost structures are just prohibitive for us, right? And so knowing that right out of the gate, I don't need to know about features. I don't need to even know anything about their story or capabilities, because I'm just going to jump to the conclusion and then educate myself. And so that's a great example of a nonlinear example. And so if you were trying to classify content, I would have been showing up as bottom of funnel, but clearly not. right? I had no intent to. So,
and what was really like enlightening on that is when you start to get some good tools around accounts, right, and account level information, and kind of map that back. What you find is the account journey doesn't match the individual's journey, right? It never does, right? So what happens is the account could be in mid-opportunity cycle, and then you have a bunch of people all of a sudden show up who show top of funnel interest because they are now being brought into the cycle and need information, right? So the account hasn't gone backwards, right? It's just we have new people doing a new research cycle for their own edification. We've also seen surges in content post signage, right? So, we have closed the customer, we've done well, and all of a sudden, there's a flurry of activity from an account that's closed, right? Because those people are like, oh, now I really should pay attention to TripActions, right? Because now we're going to be using them for 5 to 10 years, right?
Right.
I hope. So those are the kind of things where, as you kind of take a step back and you see these content trends, it becomes easier to kind of, not burrow too down on level, because again, like things change and evolve and adapt, which is why it's helpful to get that first level information and make those choices. Because in my experience, it's been that optimization that has made all the difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So on to numbers and actual metrics. So, the intent of the slide on the left is to not really show a ton of growth, right? I mean, we've shown that in the end, but that wasn't the goal. The goal was, how do we have a sustainable, scalable program that is constantly delivering the right leads and contacts for our business? As you can see, it was almost entirely commercial and mid-market through March. In April, we just started on our enterprise program, and now in May, it's 40%. In June, I can tell you the numbers are even more striking. It's a 75% mix towards enterprise and mid-market.
Amazing.
Partly because of the filters, but honestly, partly because of that's where the interest is, right? So what we've done is, again, I can't tell you how, we've gone through, restructuring, to say it politely, right? So we have the same amount of work, fewer people. Having a program that you can build and scale and set it and forget it in a certain amount of way is invaluable for us, right? Because we just don't have the time or bandwidth to keep on testing and new connectors, new everything else. So once we're able to settle on a program with Netline and kind of then we've evolved with you guys as we've changed, that's allowed us to kind of have this sustained success. Right. And then really the success, you see then on the right is around opportunities. Right. So it's a hard analysis, but I've done it, which is really interesting. If you start mapping the contact acquisition date to where those opportunities show up, right, it is a smorgasbord. Right. So you'll see, we got a massive enterprise deal in November, which is shown by that blue bar there, from a mid-market deal, from a mid-market account that grew into enterprise, that had been sitting there for 3 months, right? And all of a sudden came in. We have a number of deals here that, and this is, I would say, the outlier, but they downloaded a piece of content, we followed up with them, and they signed with us, right, immediately, right? So, but again, what we're looking for and what we've seen is, I'm at a company that has grown. Last year was 700%, right? So I need to have vendors that I can rely on to grow sustainably, because I can't afford to have one really great vendor. I have to get a great vendor, add another one, add another one, add another one, probably ad infinitum, right? So what we've seen is Netline has had the most sustained opportunity growth quarter over quarter and month over month. So we have and I probably should address this earlier, partly due to the speed of our business, we have a monthly close, right? So it's not good enough to have a great quarter. We have to have a great month every month. And that's where, having a vendor that doesn't have zeros on the board is invaluable, right? So I have a monthly number I got to hit. And if I just don't show up in March, that's not going to look good, right? And I think what's really impressive is, I added June on the opportunity slide because, we already have massive growth in the first 2 weeks of the month. But this is, again, during a time when people aren't, quote unquote, buying travel or buying, buying new programs. We are, growing and showing great growth in the content syndication channel specifically, along with others. So yeah, this is obviously the most popular slide for most when it comes to graphs. And then, just from a overarching perspective, we have taken the approach of revenue influence as a metric when we talk about content syndication, partly because of what we're looking for. If I go by a source metric, I'm not going to actually get the results I want, right? Because I'm going to focus too entirely on that old model of the commercial business where I get the one person, I close them, I make the deal. In enterprise, this doesn't work that way. We have people that we're talking to for 6 to 9 months, right? I mean, that engagement is ongoing. We use full circle insights just for, a peek under the hood in terms of how we do attribution. So that funnel is open. If I just knock those out because I wouldn't get the attribution, I would be missing out on a massive amount of possible influence from content, from other channels as well. So in total, we've influenced 26.7 million in revenue, right? So that's close won deals, and the ROI is, I rounded, David, you're welcome. I rounded down for the record. It's 13,000%, right?
Damn.
Yeah, it was 13,268 for those who want to, do that long, and see exactly what deal we got on the contract. But, and again, that's where, if I had, and I actually probably shouldn't do this, but I want to go back a slide. If we had made that ROI judgment in July, right, and you can kind of see the opportunity volume, the revenue was 0. Right. So even though the opportunities were being created, we had no closed won at that point. That's where, again, having the, experience with a vendor and the longevity and having run programs and knowing the timelines of these things has helped. All that revenue has actually come from November on. Right. So even though the program started well before that, that's where ROI is a great metric as long as it's in the right time frame. And I found that right time frame is highly dependent on channel and highly, for us, dependent on segment. I will be much more aggressive on judging a channel that is expected to drive commercial business from an ROI perspective than an enterprise business. Because enterprise needs 9 months, commercial needs 3, right? So yeah, that was kind of the, as they call it, the big slide in terms of the numbers.
Yeah, that's exceptional. It's it's super compelling to hear you tell the story, because obviously we've worked together on this deck, but I've not heard you articulate this. So seeing it versus hearing it is compelling. Yeah. That's very true. And so, again, appreciate it. We're humbled to be a part of this success. So thank you so much for sharing that. From our side, I said we were going to close out the session and preferably try to get everybody out of here on time. With just a few nuggets of additional information and insights, and really based upon a lot of the feedback the columnist just shared around content consumption data, what's happening across our platform. And so what we've done historically is we've taken a look at hold on a second, I'm trying to get this slide up, sorry. There we go. And so what we've done is we've taken a look at the holistic behavior that's occurring across our platform on an annualized basis, and have written a report at the end of each year that's really looking at the content consumption trends across the B2B web. It's based upon nearly 500 million signals, about 5 million leads that have been processed for our customers over the years. And so it dives into a ton of nuggets around content consumption behavior and patterns by job function, job area, industry, company size, matrixing of those data points, some metrics around content consumption gap. Specifically, the content consumption gap is the metric that specifically is about users ultimately when they've downloaded the content and ultimately when they've gotten access to engaging with it after the initial download. So what the report is not is ultimately the notion of this old study that always continued to exist, which was people consistently in the marketing landscape specifically are always talking about how they've conducted a survey specific to 200 of their peers. At that point, their peers are commenting and prognosticating about what's happening. And so we've decided to go a completely different way. And it gets back to Colum's point, which is let's arm marketers with deep marketer specific data points that allow them to not only run informed campaigns, but have actionable outcomes based upon the data that we're sharing. And so this is all accomplished by simply the nature of our business model, quite honestly. And so we've designed our platform to be content type agnostic. we are specifically in a position to push out all different types of content across the platform at scale, and most importantly, deliver performance-oriented leads based upon the criteria of Column's and everyone else's unique and ever-changing campaign requirements. And so pivoting as they've pivoted is something that is just in nature part and parcel of the product and how we work. And so at the core, you can kind of view the culmination of this data and how it's actually delivered to the marketplace. It's based upon delivering the greatest volume of first-party sourced and fully permissioned data that's associated to content consumption. And so this isn't about third-party signals. This isn't about inferring behavior based upon IP addresses. This is about actual users engaging with content, proactively providing their information, and proceeding to engage with a brand. To Column's point, you cannot isolate specific stages of a journey for every single piece of content. Obviously, if you're publishing a buyer's guide or a vendor matrix comparison, maybe you can assimilate some of that to down funnel related behavior, but not always. And so the report digs into a lot of that. But one thing that was interesting for us is that we've constantly received feedback from clients, specifically asking to provide more of a live view into that static report. And so we've developed a companion product, which really is a hybrid between the data that's documented in the report and ultimately what's made available through the portal itself as a paying customer. And so what you see here with Audience Explorer, though, is the ability to get a ungated view into B2B content consumption behavior across every industry that you can think of, by every job area, company size, and actually look at the top trending types of content, the top trending topics, active in-market companies, even the personas in those companies. This is a completely free tool. Again, you don't even need to register to use it, but it provides a ton of really cool insights and it updates daily. And so obviously the motivation from our perspective is to first educate marketers as to how they should be engaging in the market and really have a better sense as to what that data can do for them. From there, our goal obviously is to try to connect the dots and make that happen for them. But this is a tool completely no hooks to it whatsoever. And so we'll leave you today just with the ability to download the report. It's also available in the resources section of the console. And again, I'd love to thank you all for your time. Column, again, it's been amazing to hear the story in addition to just seeing the slides. So, all right, well, we'll wrap up here. And then, yeah, again, if anybody has any questions afterwards, please feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to follow up offline. You can contact both of us via email and or LinkedIn. Look for us there. Column, I don't know if you prefer to be hit up on Twitter. I'm more of a LinkedIn
is the most reliable one for me.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so again, thanks everybody for their time. Column, again, thank you so much for sharing the story, and take care.